Okay, I'm going to do an acrylic painting today. So I'll first of all take you on a tour of the things I'm going to use. Brushes first. This first brush is by a company called Major Brushes. It's a size 10 round brush. In the past I've bought packs of these brushes. 50 brushes are about £18, so they're really cheap. However, they last really well. They keep a good point. But as I say, you have to buy a large quantity to get a good quality cheap brush like this one. Then I've got a Daylon brush. I think this is quite an old brush as well. It's synthetic fibre. All of these brushes in fact are synthetic rather than natural hair brushes. The brushes I use for acrylics just do tend to be synthetic brushes as well. And the only difference I've been able to identify between acrylic brushes and watercolour brushes is that the fibres or the hairs do have a bit more firmness about them. Watercolour brushes can be quite soft. So Daler again, Daler Rowney Kryler brush, made for acrylic painting, as is the Daler Rowney System 3 brush. You can see this had a lot of use. It's all mucky down in the roots of the bristles, but it still performs all right. It's starting to split a little bit. I don't know if you can see that. There we are. You can see the hair starting to stick out a little bit here, but for putting large areas of colour on, that doesn't matter too much. However, it does matter, I feel, when you're looking at doing thin lines. And I've got two brushes here. This one's the Winsor & Newton Scepter Gold Rigger brush, which is out. It's actually a sable and synthetic blend. It has got some natural hair in it, and it's got, as you can see, very long fibres, and it's a size 0. But next to it, here's a Pro Art Proline Plus, which is a size 1. So it's a similar size, but you can see perhaps that the shorter bristle brush is starting to split. Let's just wipe it and see if I can get those bristles to stick together. Oops, there we go. Oh, you can see, even if it's wet, there are hairs starting to escape from the cluster at the business end, which isn't very desirable. But the rigger brushes, they stay together. Last of all, there's another Pro Art Acrylics brush, obviously designed for acrylic use, and it's got a very firm bristle there, that one. The thing about acrylic paint is it does dry really quickly, and that can be an advantage if you want to carry on with your work without having to wait for it to dry like you have to with oil paint. But the disadvantage is, of course, that it can dry on the palette while you're actually in a painting session. So you can buy stay wet palettes, or you can make one yourself. Here I've got famous Ferrero Rocher box, and inside there I'm going to put a piece of kitchen roll, which is going to be wet just with water. This will give a reservoir, a moist reservoir, to keep the paint wet during the session. Of course, if I squeeze the paint out directly onto that, it'll soak into the kitchen roll. So what I need is a membrane, just using ordinary kitchen greaseproof paper. Cut a piece off. And what that does is it allows moisture up through, but it doesn't allow paint down through. And as I said, you can buy stay wet palettes, and basically this is what you get. They sell it with blotting paper and what they call it, membrane, but it's just like greaseproof paper. That's starting to curl up, so I just turn it over to lay it down, make sure it stays flat. And once you squeeze your paint out onto there, it'll stay wet all day. And of course, when you've finished painting, you can put the lid on it and it'll be wet for another painting session. That's the secret. The paint I've got again a mixture of different makes of paint. Winsor & Newton Galleria, Atelier Interactive Artists Acrylic. Those are quite soft, those ones. Another Winsor & Newton Galleria. Now, this is a really old tube, and it says here flow formula. So it's meant to be quite a soft paint, but in fact I think it's thickened up with age, that one. This is just says series 1 on it, and it's quite a soft paint like the Atelier ones. And there's a Dale Rowney System 3. So I've squeezed some paint out ready for work. Just reaching for a pair of pliers, because often these lids do get stuck down. There we go. Let's see how thick that is. Not what I would call flow formula at all. But maybe it was when it was new. So these colours are going to be for my painting of the oak tree, similar to the other video where I painted this oak tree in watercolour. So there I've got Dioxazine purple. That's why I got confused with the watercolour, because the watercolour is called Dioxazine violet, although it does seem to be the same colour. Phthalocyanine blue. Lidding the box to keep the colours wet while I talk a little bit about colour mixing and colour sampling. I keep a book for acrylic paint, which is just where I can keep a record of all the colours I've got or have ever had. And for each one I get, I write its name down, paint a little bit of it out, and then I paint it out diluted with water and also mixed with white, so I can see the difference between its translucent form and its opaque form. If you let paint out with water, it becomes more translucent, which makes it paler. If you add white to it, it makes it paler. So a whole page of blues, a page of greens, a page of yellows, some reds, and then let's have a look here at I found the sample of Dioxazine purple I've got. There it is, full strength, there it is, mixed with white, and here's the colour I used in watercolour, which is called Dioxazine violet in that particular make. But it's the same, I think. Next, a page of browns, earth browns and yellows. And I've tested here some mixtures of browns and blues to find those lovely muted sagey greens and greys that you can get with brown and blue. The colours I've chosen for today include Phthalocyanine blue and burnt sienna, and I've mixed them together in various quantities. Here the burnt sienna side shows a little bit of Phthalocyanine blue mixed into the burnt sienna, and on this side the Phthalocyanine blue with a little bit of burnt sienna mixed into it, and each time mixed out with white as well, so I can see its paler version. The paper I've stretched on this piece of board is just a piece of, I think it's just cheap watercolour paper. I really don't even know what make it is, but it's quite smooth. Acrylic is very versatile. It can be painted on all sorts of different surfaces. You can paint it on canvas and use it thick like oil paint, or even thinned down on canvas. It's incredibly versatile. I often just use it on cartridge paper in my sketchbook, or yeah, there's a sketchbook page where I've painted with acrylic paint, or on watercolour paper, as I said, or on card or wooden boards. You can paint it on any, as long as it's a slightly porous surface, it sticks really well. Here's the watercolour painting that I've been fiddling with a little bit more since the end of the video that deals mostly with this painting. So I shall use the painting as reference mostly, but also having a look at the photograph that I took today, where in a week the leaves have come out so much more. They're creating more shadow, more drama. I took that this morning just before I started videoing. And I also took a photograph just of the sky. Incredible, rich colour. Because I'm going to paint in a very different way with the acrylic paint and paint all the sky first. So the paper will have sky, and then the tree I can paint on top of the sky. It'll show you the difference between acrylic painting and watercolour painting quite clearly. I'm just getting a bit of water out into the palette so that I can mix my white to a slightly thinner consistency. Just makes it feed onto the brush more easily. There, it's nice and creamy. Tiny little dot of phthalocyanine blue going into there. What a powerful colour that is. To blend it in quite thoroughly so it is not streaky. And that's that quite long bristled flat brush, which is good for covering larger areas like this. You can see the brush marks I'm putting down are quite short and going in different directions. I'm not going to aim for a very, very smooth graduation of blues, because most of the blue is going to be covered up by the leaves of the tree. But I don't want it to be streaky, and I do find that the longer the brush stroke you make, the more streaky the effect is. Which is why you can see me putting it on in this more kind of choppy way. Paint is drying so fast, you can't really blend it wet into wet. As soon as I've put a patch down, the previous patch is dry. I've speeded up the video because there's quite a lot of paint mixing and paint applying until we get across to the other side of the page. What I'm doing is just adding more phthalocyanine blue to the mixture to make it darker. It goes over towards the left hand side. I need to mix a slightly bigger quantity because I know I've got a fair amount of the paper still to cover. I also put a little bit of that dioxazine purple in there. On the left hand side of the sky I can see more warmer purpley tones of colour. So it's gone from a light, slightly greenish blue on the right hand side over towards the left, a more purpley, warm, darker blue. Something else you can see happening is how the colour is going darker as it dries. It's quite interesting to see that as this part of the video is speeded up. You can really see the paint drying and how much darker it goes when it's dry compared to when it was wet. So that's the first pass, and then what I do is I go back from left to right, just adding more blue to the mixture because I felt it was perhaps going slightly too purpley. Going back in, trying to blend over those bands of colour. More white now as I'm working towards the right, wanting that colour to go lighter. And there is still more of the purple in it here than there was when I did the first pass from right to left. So I'm going back in with some blue, lightening it up, and all this is judgment down to experience, I suppose. This is quite a challenging exercise to do. But as we're doing it for the tree to go on top of, it doesn't really matter too much about getting it very, very even. Sky done. Now it just has to dry. So it's quite shiny still on that left hand side. Just got to put it down, let it dry for a while. So I put some of that paint down in my sketchbook so that I could test the colours that I want to mix next for the sky, for the tree. So this is lemon yellow. Now I know that lemon yellow is quite a translucent colour, so let's just have a look how the lemon yellow looks by itself on top of that dark blue. First of all, put a little tiny touch of phthalocyanine blue into it, which again is a translucent colour. So both of these translucent colours are going to, it's going to be difficult to cover up the blue with those colours. On top of the white paper it looks like a nice bright colour. As soon as you see it on top of the blue, you can see how translucent it is. So what's the answer? Let's blend it into some white. See if that makes it opaque enough to cover up the blue. Still a nice limey, predominantly yellow green. And clearly that white has made it thicker and stronger and more opaque. So I'll take a great big dollop of white over there, blend my yellow and white together so that I know all that pale green that I'm going to make will be opaque enough to cover the sky. I'm using that large size round brush because to begin a painting I usually make large marks first, fill in the main areas of colour called blocking in, and then switch over to a smaller brush to put smaller marks and finer detail in. Now I am working from the picture on my phone at the moment, which you can't see because I've got it on my knee, but I will put it in view. I'll lean it up against my coffee cup, you can see there in the left hand top corner of the frame. Just forgot to put it there. There we go, there it is. Now you can see what I'm working from. And there's a lot of this dabbing and dibbing and dotting. So I've sped up the video again so you don't get too bored. Just get all these areas blocked in where the light is shining so brightly through those spring leaves. Contrast beautifully with the dark blue of the sky. Every now and then I also add a little tiny bit of water to the paint. It does sometimes thickens up a little bit, even though it's on a stay wet surface in the palette. It still does thicken up slightly, and it starts to get a bit cloggy on the brush. So just blending a little bit of water in with it helps it to feed into the brush and paint a little bit more easily. Switching to the smaller brush now, smaller round brush. I'm ready to put in some more detailed marks. One of the things you can do if you find yourself making marks that are a bit repetitive and a bit similar, and you want to try and vary the marks, is just to vary the angle that the brush comes in to the paper at. I'm ready to test the darker colour now, the darker green colour for the shadowy part of the leaves. So I've got that burnt sienna that I squeezed out of the old tube, and I really think it's time I ordered some new burnt sienna, because that paint has gone so thick and horrible. It's taking quite a lot of working to get rid of the lumps and blend in with the phthalocyanine blue. So I'm looking for a really nice rich dark green. Quite surprising that blue and brown can make bright green. But there you go, that's the power of the phthalocyanine blue. very greeny blue, very strong and greeny blue, and it looks maybe too dark, almost black, so putting some white in it, I can see what colour I've got. Looks rather bluish still. Let's try that now. Warm it up a little bit. Bit of burnt sienna just to warm it up. Still too cool and bluish. Yeah, I think I'm quite happy with that one. Let's hope I've made enough of it. Back in with the thicker brush again, because I want to block in some of these larger shadowy areas. So now I've got to concentrate between putting the shadowy areas of leaves on, letting them overlap with the lighter area of leaves, but also leaving those little windows of sky showing in the spaces. And I can go back with the lighter green afterwards. This is the beauty of acrylic paint and oil paint as well, is that you can paint pale colours over dark colours, and the pale colours will cover the dark colours. Just speeding up a little bit here just to save some time. So I do have to make a little bit more of that colour, and I added a little bit of the light yellowy green to it as well. And time passed and I'd done all that. Mixing a sort of medium shade of green now, between that very pale green and the darkest green. I've got a third tone going on there, where there is light hitting onto the leaves but not coming through the leaves. So against the dark leaves it looks light, and against the light leaves it looks a bit darker. All tones are relative to each other. It's also quite interesting, this brush is actually making the shapes of leaves that look more like sycamore leaves though, rather than oak leaves. But that's just a completely happy accident. I really quite like the mark that this brush makes. I must remember to paint a sycamore tree with it next time. I've recreated some more of the shadow colour, and I'm picking up the smaller brush now, ready to put some more detail into those shadowy areas. can see how I'm able to switch between light paint, dark paint. I'm going back in with a lighter colour now. This mixture is going to be for the branches and the twigs. So it's burnt sienna and dioxazine purple, which will make a cool greyish brown, hopefully. Let's test it out and see what I've got. Wow, that's so dark. Looks like black, but when you see the painting in real life, you can see that it's not black. It's kind of like a warm charcoal colour, but it contrasts really well with the leaves. So to begin with, to paint the thicker parts of the boughs and the large branches, I've got that short, thicker round brush. Sorry, the thinner of the two round brushes, but I've not picked up the thin rigger brush yet. Look at that twisting movement that I've got there. Can you see that? And put the brush down, start painting, and then give it a twist and a turn. So the twisting keeps the bristles of the brush stuck together. It just creates that sort of branch-like shape. It's well worth playing in your sketchbook with your brushes and your paint, just doing mark making and developing this language of marks, which then you can use when you do a painting or a study like this. Experiment and play. Of course, if you're working from a photograph, the temptation is to be exact and try and follow the branches exactly as they are. But what I'm trying to do is to just paint the character of those branches and more or less where they are without following every exact twist and turn. Right, here's the rigger. Here's that lovely rigger brush. The long, long bristles. I've made the paint thin enough to flow nicely off the rigger brush, going along one of the marks I've made previously and then just extending it and again twisting. Did you see that little twist it gets? So I was watching the tip of the brush, watch my hand. There you are, twist. And twists and turns both ways. Sorry, I didn't realise I was out of view when I was painting this little bit. It's quite hard to keep your eye on the painting and on the camera at the same time. Bits like that, where that branch goes thinner before it joins the other branch, I will come back and fix later on, but not in this video. I only noticed that afterwards. funny, isn't it, when you're painting? You stop really seeing what you're doing. You go away and have a cup of tea and come back to it. You suddenly see something that you hadn't seen while you were doing it. I think I decided that the colour was really too dark to carry on with. I wanted to paint some branches that look as if they're a bit further away in the tree. So I've added a little bit of white to the mixture there, which I can then see that the colour is really quite purple. So I'm trying to neutralise the purple by adding some of the opposite colour. And the opposite colour to purple is yellow. Thinking about primary and secondary colours, purple is made from red and blue, and the other primary colour is yellow. So the yellow falls opposite to the purple. And opposite colours, when they're added to each other, will neutralise each other. So if you've got a purple that's too vivid purple, you add a bit of yellow to it, it makes it less purple. Likewise, if you had yellow that was too bright and you wanted to make it slightly softer and more grey, you would add purple to it. The same thing works for all the pairs of colours. If your green is too bright, add a bit of red. If your orange is too bright, add a bit of blue. And vice versa with each one. It's magic. Try it for yourself. I've just got to clean this brush. That was the brush I put the big thick boughs in with. I want to pick up some lighter colour, so I'm trying to clean out all the purpley colour that was stuck in the brush. So the one thing about acrylic paint is it really does stick in your brushes. So after the painting session, it's worth giving them a really good clean. Soak them in water for as long as you can. I usually lie them down in the sink. There's some water in the bottom of the sink. I lie them down so they're not standing on the end of the bristles. Give them a good wash with water, and then a good wash with either brush soap or hand washing soap or dishwashing soap. You can actually buy brush soap, which is the best thing for restoring paintbrushes with. It's quite expensive, but it is worth getting, I think, to make your brushes' lives last longer. Gives a good sense of depth having a few leaves coming in front of the dark branches like that. Otherwise, if you just paint the dark branches on top of the leaves that you've painted, it looks as though they're sitting in front of them, whereas of course with the growth of the tree, there'll be some branches coming more towards you with leaves on the end, which will be covering up some of those other branches and twigs. And of course this is a simplified version, this is an interpretation of what I can see. It would take a lot longer to do a more photographically realistic painting, but I think it gives the feeling of that morning sunlight coming through the tree. You can see most of the blue sky is covered up now, but you can see the graduation of colour from the right to the left, from the slightly more turquoisey blue through to the purpley blue. I'm actually sort of looking up into the tree, facing more or less north. So the left-hand side of the picture is west and the right side of the picture is east. It's quite interesting to look at the change in colour in the sky as it goes from one side to the other, how it varies from morning to afternoon. That's probably enough for this study. That's all the brushes I've used. A quick swill out in the water, but you can still see how much paint there is left on there. Going to need a much better brush washing session later on in the kitchen. And there they all are. A flat, 2 rounds and a rigger. And just 4 colours. Plus white, of course. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. If you like to follow the video and try one of your own, or even take your own photograph and do a painting of your own subject, looking up into the sky through a tree